there will have to be an international project, the likes of which we haven't seen since like World War II, to kind of come into Gaza and make it anywhere near a livable, survivable place. And that doesn't seem to be the political plan either. So, what will happen to these kids is that their lives will go unlived, that they'll be alive, but they'll kind of be ghosts, and that's a tragedy.
To our listeners, welcome back to the Sunday Long Read podcast and a new episode of our Behind the Story series. Today we are joined by journalist Rhana Natour, who wrote a pretty powerful story for the Atavist Magazine last year and just won a big national award for it. So Rhana, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Amanda.
So you just won a National Magazine Award in the profile writing category, along with the Atavist Magazine, which is super exciting. What was your reaction when it happened? What are your thoughts? What are you thinking about it?
I was so happy and so grateful. I didn't even know that Atavist put us up for this award. And the fact that they felt this piece worthy of all the pieces that they did was just so touching. It was not on my bingo card for 2025 at all. So when I heard that I was a finalist and saw all the pieces that were in the company of profile writing, I mean, they were all such excellent pieces. I really couldn't believe it. And I'm mostly known as a video producer, a documentarian, a TV journalist. And so writing is something that came later for me. It was the best medium for this story. So it was really, really special. And, I'm glad that Layan's story really went beyond the politics of this and really touched people as a story, as a narrative piece. And that people were impacted by what happened to her and who she was as a person. And that makes me really happy for her as well.
Definitely. And so from the beginning, did you have this exact story in mind that you pitched to the Atavist, or did you contact them thinking you might want to cover this topic in some way and were trying to find a way in? Or what was the origin of this story?
It was kind of a thing that a lot of different things came together. So I read the New Yorker did a piece about how this might be the largest cohort of pediatric amputees. It was a short write-up accompanied by some really amazing pictures, and it kind of breached the question. Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, who's a British Palestinian surgeon who was in Gaza as a doctor for 43 days, insisted and still insists to this day that it is the largest cohort of amputees. And it was based on quotes from him. And I thought, this is insane. Like, we need to know more about this. Could this be real? To know that in just a few months, at that point it was a few months, we now have such a large cohort of children who have lost limbs. Like, I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And it happened at a time when, so many children were being killed, and a lot of people were talking about and thinking about, rightfully so, all the kids that were being killed in this war. And I just couldn't stop thinking about, what about the children who survive? What about the children who survive this war? At that point a year ago, Gaza had been maybe 50%, 60% destroyed. All the medical facilities, all the schools. And I wondered about them, what happens to them? And I was talking about this to Iman Mohammed, who's a photojournalist who is from Gaza. She came to the U.S. in 2014, and she said, there are a couple of kids that are coming to the U.S. for medical treatment. We should do something on them. And immediately I thought, oh, this is kind of a loophole, because we don't have access to these kids or to anybody in Gaza. International journalists are not allowed in Gaza. It's one of the first wars where this is the case. And, we get to spend an intimate and personal and physical, in real life, amount of time with a kid who has survived this war. And we wouldn't be able to do that otherwise. And there's this kind of little tear in the matrix where we can. So we started basically talking to the NGOs that were bringing these kids here. And there's two main NGOs. There's Heal Palestine and there's PCRF. And I had already worked on a story that related to Heal Palestine's work about two kids who came from Gaza to they had some genetic defects that they were fixing with a really rare and specialized surgery in the U.S. They returned to Gaza and they were killed in the war. So I did a story about them for The Guardian. And so Steve Sotheby is the founder of Heal Palestine. He's its executive director. And I said, I want to talk to everybody who's come in and everybody who is going to come in. And I wanted to cast for this story. I didn't know if it was going to be video, if it was going to be written. We knew it was going to have a photo component because Iman was going to be the photojournalist on the project. But besides that, I didn't really know. And so I started talking to all these families. I spoke to two kids who were severely burned. All their family was killed, and their grandmother was one of their few surviving family members. They were in Boston. They were just too sick to participate in it. They were in a burn unit. And there were other kids and families that I talked to that they were just too traumatized, too young. The parents didn't want to be involved. It's you're getting them in their most raw moments right when they come to the U.S. as they're getting medical treatment. And some of them still have family members that aren't accounted for. And it really, a lot of things need to come together in order for this to work. So I heard about a girl in Chicago named Layan Albaz. She came alone and she was with a host family. I talked to the host family, and they're Arab Americans living in Chicago. They have 3 girls, and they said, yeah, Layan, she's great. She's very mature. She's really, you wouldn't even think anything happened. She's just, going about her life as normal. And I was like, I don't know if that's the case, but okay. And so we started talking, and I wanted to just get to know the host family, wanted to know a little bit more about Layan's story. And then I text message Bahat Asaf, who's the father, the host father, and I said, hey, how's Layan doing? And he's like, well, we just heard that her brother was killed. Her father might also be dead. We don't know. And it's just been a really, really hard day. And I felt so bad for her because I had been thinking about, she's come alone. Is she going to have a family to come back to? Like, what will happen to her family? I mean, I couldn't get that out of my head. And in the pitch, I posited that as a hypothetical, not really thinking that this girl would experience a loss as we're, talking about interviewing her. And I talked to Layan. She she was interested in telling her story. She didn't have many questions for me. And I kept on asking her, do you want to know anything about me? Do you want to know anything about the story? She's like, no, I'll see you when you get here. And it was really chill, but it was almost too chill. So I was like, no, this is...
Right.
I don't... he's like, yeah, she's totally fine. She's just, she sits with us. She has a good time. And I'm like, that doesn't add up. She's sad sometimes. And then as the time of us going to Chicago drew closer, they kind of started preparing me for this trip.
Mm-hmm. And before she gets to the States for medical treatment in the first place, can you talk about how she lost her legs, what that airstrike looked like initially, and how she went through all of that back in Gaza?
The way she describes it was shocking because she remembers a lot. There are huge, vast points in her memory that she doesn't. And, who knows if these are real memories or filled in by some sort of dreamscape. But she was in her sister's family home. It was a multi-story home. It was an apartment building. And an airstrike hit the apartment building. And she remembers the moment it hit. She remembers a wall, like a cement block coming down, and basically separating her from her sister and her child in that moment. And a lot of people were killed, including 2 of her sisters, a niece and a nephew. The nephew was just a few days old. She had been spending time at her sister's house, which they thought was safe. She had been spending time there because her sister just had a baby. and she had visited her in the hospital, and they had come home with the baby.
Right. I mean, it sounds like it such a awful, brutal thing to experience and then witness family members dying. But then also she then eventually makes it to the hospital, and then her both of her legs are amputated without anesthesia. Um, does she say that she remembers that happening? That experience of being in the hospital and all of the fear, and what does she say about that time?
She doesn't remember the amputation. There were many follow-up surgeries. Often, the kids who lose their legs, they have a lot of scar tissues. They have a lot of injuries that they have to have follow-up surgeries, and she had to have several. She doesn't remember that. She remembers, she woke up in the same hospital that she just left after her sister gave birth. She was just there, to witness the birth of her nephew. So she, remembers being in the elevator and looking down and saying, "Where are my legs?" And that's when she realized that she both legs were amputated.
The part of your story, I mean, there are many parts that are very striking, but immediately when you start reading it and you have that description of her arriving to the States with her new host family, and that anger and frustration and annoyance about everything that's happened to her, is coming through, in the forefront, more so than sadness, at least initially. Do you think that people want or expect victims of violence or warfare to act in a certain way, to act like helpless or sad or like a victim, and that when they act angry at the world, and that's something that people are don't expect that reaction from someone in that situation, even though that might be your only reaction.
I think when people sit and think about it, of course it makes sense that they're angry. She was just a kid living her life, and this war didn't have anything to do with her. And and now she has to grapple with what life looks like. And she lost her home, she lost her school, she lost relatives, she lost her best friend. And it of course it makes sense, but somehow when we're facing it, it's surprising and shocking, and you still have the normal reaction that any human would have when you're facing an angry person who's saying mean things, you know? You're a human being, and even though this person has faced trauma, after a while, people will react, and they'll have that same reaction. So it's hard because that anger is a natural consequence, but it also gets in the way of their healing. It gets in the way of their ability to map out a future. That's the tragedy of it all, right? Like, uh everybody has been immensely patient with her. Everybody has really, given her a lot of grace, but that's not going to be everybody.
Right. Do you think it says something about, very well meaning, good hearted people who want to help and do something like volunteers or people with Heal or other groups, that they want to see that positive impact? They want to see someone be better and heal. And that sometimes that could get in the way of someone having this full spectrum of emotion after something like this.
Absolutely. It's a really awkward dance, and it's not anybody's fault that it's an awkward dance, but it takes a lot of energy and a lot of community support and fundraising to bring a kid from Gaza to the US. And oftentimes it's these communities of people that are responsible for taking care of this child, and they've heard about this child, they've seen pictures of this child, they feel that they know this kid when they arrive, and this kid is like, "Who are you?" You know?
Rightfully so.
I don't know you. I mean, they're often gracious and grateful and happy, but it puts a kind of responsibility on a person who's experienced this trauma. I don't know if you've seen clips, but on social media there are a lot of clips of children arriving from Gaza to the US being welcomed by crowds who are just thrilled to see them. They're giving them gifts, they take pictures with them. They are so genuinely happy. Oftentimes they've dedicated their own hard-earned money for this to happen. And it's a natural, and it's a kind of our own guilt, right? It's like you've seen a lot of kids who didn't make it out. And now that you see a kid that has a chance at safety and recovery and healing, it's a really amazing thing to see. Um, but, it's the worst thing that's ever happened to the recipient of this care, of this charity, of these services.
Right. And then to have to be, as she says in this story, a product, or feeling like you're a product, feeling like you're being showboated around so that people can see the horrific thing that's happened to you when, like, again, like she says, that when in the future she wants to have a life that where she moves on from the injuries in some way.
Right. And it's interesting because Leanne just refused to play that game. She, there were volunteers who helped her get to the US, and they wanted to come with her to doctor's appointments. They wanted to meet her. And she's like, I don't want to meet you. I'm not
Right.
interested.
Right. No, it makes sense. Like you said, it's an awkward dance, and it makes sense how both sides would feel that way.
And
Uh,
people respect her for that decision. But, she's also there's also bursts of anger when she sees kids running around and she can't move. So there was one instance where she was invited to dinner, and the host had kids who were running around, and she's in a wheelchair, and she just called them a bunch of punk ass monkeys, and she just screamed, "You're a bunch of punk ass monkeys." And you know, like, you can't blame her, and everybody just kind of looked past that. But it's something that, when you're that age, these are incredibly strong emotions, and you haven't developed tools on what to do with them. And even if you had tools, this is such a huge loss. I don't even know if any tool could help you deal with this. You're just going to experience these emotions and have to have them run through you.
yeah, it's one thing to experience being a young teenager in a time where we're in a situation where there's not violence and warfare. And it's another thing to experience it when you're a double amputee. So you're navigating being 14 and then also having these really serious, intense injuries that other people can't understand.
Exactly. And she's here without her parents. I mean, if we would think about ourselves at 13, 14 years old, here without our in a country without our parents, most would wreak havoc if they could. It's like they're how and plus how are you going to discipline this child? Even as the host mom, this child is suffering. You're going to put them in timeout. Like, the worst thing that could ever happen to them has happened to them. You have no stick, so to speak. I couldn't imagine thinking about disciplining my own child after suffering so much loss. So it's this thing where they know that, and they're still they're still 13-year-olds. So it's you have all the things, like you said, all the things that you have to deal with a 13-year-old girl, which is difficult, and then you have all of this on top of it.
I mean, that's why your story is so interesting, because you expect, or you kind of expect that someone in her situation might be a caricature, of a victim. Or you expect to read a story like this one and, based on other stories or other things you've maybe seen in the past, of a way that she might act after this, that we've seen portrayed. But in reality, I mean, this story is coming to terms with, this is an actual person that this has happened to. And it's not going to be this clean cut image of sad and then happy that people are helping. It's going to come with these crazy range of emotions, which, how could it not?
Right, right. That's why I really loved her story and wanted to tell it. After that initial meeting, I knew it could be a huge liability, though, because she wanted to talk to us today. What is she going to feel like tomorrow? Is she going to tell me something she told to me on Tuesday is off the record after the fact, and do I have to oblige with that?
Mhm.
So the thing that I loved about her is this thing that scared me to death about telling her story.
Right. At what point did you, or was it from the very beginning that after meeting her, after knowing her better, did you decide this story was going to capture all of those complexities of her personality? The anger. At what point did you decide that the anger would kind of be a big part of this story?
Right away. I mean, um, after she kind of rolled her eyes and turned around and whipped herself around and then told us, I'm going to have a future and this is how you're going to portray me. I thought this girl has a lot of fight in her, and it makes sense. But also, she might drop out like tomorrow. So maybe I need to hedge my bets a little bit. And I tried to, but there was no one that had the layers that she has. So it really wasn't until this piece was out. There was every day I thought it would fall apart. Because even if after multiple reporting trips, if Layan called me and said, I don't want to do this story, I would have to listen to her. That's what I decided early on. And, I would just have to scrap it all. And I was scared every day that I would get that call, but I knew that I would have to listen to her. And I was afraid what she would think after the piece came out because, she is very much aware that this is a story that's out in the world. She's on social media, she reads things, she sees news. And I didn't want it to have a negative impact on her.
Right. And what did you hear an update on what she thought about the story after it came out last year?
The fact that I didn't get a call screaming at me was just, because it was also translated into Arabic. And that I want to give a shout out to Sayward Darby for this because she wanted to make sure that the Arab world and the world in the Middle East could read a story like this. It's happening there. So I knew that she would be able to read it and understand it and not just look at the picture. She was very picky about the pictures, but I wanted to make sure the story was sound. And she really, I don't know if loved it is the word, but the feedback that she got after this article, I think really filled her with confidence. It's one thing to have something terrible happen to you, and it's a whole other injury entirely to have nobody care about it. And I think the fact that people cared about what happened to her, cared about the fact that she was fighting this fight of trying to have a future, and people encouraged her and told her, how pretty she was. I mean, as a 13-year-old girl, you look so beautiful. That kind of thing, like, you love that, right? And I think it kind of, I'm not just a statistic. I am Layan Albaz. My story matters, my future matters, and who I am matters. And I think the framing of that really mattered to her, that this is something that the world cares to hear.
Definitely. Yeah, and to the photos, definitely, especially some of the ones at the end where she's standing in a garden or outside, are really beautiful pictures. I mean, they look like they could be in a magazine separately, not about a story like this. So I could see her being happy that she's shown standing up. The injury is not totally visible, that she just looks like a 14-year-old who's standing outside, like, enjoying life.
Yeah, we wanted that for her because she hated that that she went viral for this interview where she was just in a hospital bed. She was on a lot of pain medication. She didn't like how she looked. She felt that she looked weak. And for Layan, I think the way that her trauma response is, it's important for her to look strong.
The interesting thing about that is I think that's how everyone would feel. It's interesting because it shouldn't be a novel idea that she didn't like the fact that she looked injured and weak and sick and that she wanted to look beautiful and strong. I think everyone in that situation would feel the same way. It's just interesting that we don't, from the outside, think that way about victims of something like this, that we think that we don't ponder the fact that they would want to look strong.
Yeah, it does make sense. At the same time, the reason that you're weak is not your fault. So why are you kind of taking personal responsibility for it, I guess? It's like, of course, you just had your leg amputated. It's not your fault that you are weak. You're physically weak. But it does make sense because imagine us, you wake up from a surgery, your sister snaps a picture after you're, coming out of anesthesia, asks you a couple questions, puts it on the internet. You would be so angry.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And she does, I mean, I love the scenes before all of this happens, before the airstrike, where you're talking about her and her best friend and what they were like before all of this. And you do get a sense of her personality, that it seems like she was this fiery person even before this, so that there's like that through line there.
That's what I found really interesting. There were some points where, you think about being a kid in Gaza as being scary, as, um, you're always experiencing war and things like that. But a thing that I didn't really think about is it is also kind of can be a suffocating fishbowl because you can't leave. So the society is kind of insulated into this small place. And for a preteen, in any other situation, in any other, if she was born, if she had an alternative reality, I think Layan Albaz would be like the lead in a school play.
Hmm.
She gets bored easily. She needs to be entertained. And I think in a place like Gaza, there isn't a lot of outlets for somebody like that. When she met Sema was just a breath of fresh air. She was rebellious. She was down to do mischievous things. She didn't care what anybody thought. And I don't think Leon had ever met somebody like that. And it was her twin flame. She's like, okay, now Gaza can be my playground. And they really did make it like their playground. And I think Leanne loved how she just stood up to society in a way.
Hmm. And it seems that after her friend then died, that she's almost like carrying on that personality, for both of them. I mean, I didn't think about that until now, but in some way, it's honoring her, her late friend by continuing to be that person.
I think in a lot of ways the death of her best friend was a lot deeper of a cut than even the death of her sisters. And it's not because she loved one more than the other, but it's because I don't know if you ever remember growing up and you just met somebody that like you could do everything with and you were joined at the hip. It's kind of an irreplaceable relationship that is different than a sibling. It's just a different kind of love. And I think in almost every media interview that she's done after her injury, she has mentioned her friend. And I think she kind of wants to carry the torch of the memory of her friend, um, and make sure that she was a big part of this story because she was a big part of her life, but also because Summer didn't get the opportunity to live out her life.
Hmm. Absolutely. I mean, that relationship with a best friend, especially when you're a preteen, which they were at the time, I mean, that is, yeah, well, one of the most powerful relationships you can have. So I can absolutely see why she would want to mention that to you and in other stories that she does.
Yeah, she talked about it sooner and in more depth, who Sama was, before she even talked about herself.
Hey everyone, Amanda here with a quick intermission. If you're liking this episode and want more behind the scenes stories like this one, make sure to follow the Sunday Long Read podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever else you get your podcasts. You can also check out our website at sundaylongread.com. There you'll find original stories, our true crime newsletter, and of course, our weekly newsletter. You can become a Sunday Long Read member for only $5 a month and get early and exclusive editions of the newsletter. And now, back to the episode. Do you have an update now on where she is, or almost a year after this story coming out? Because I know at the end of the story you say there are a couple different things that could happen. She doesn't want to go back to Gaza. Maybe she'll go to Egypt to stay with a relative. Do you know what has happened now, or do you have an update on that?
So Leanne is still in the U.S. She's still staying with the host family that I profiled in that piece in Chicago. She's going to school with the Asaf girls, her host sisters, so to speak. And she's walking on prosthetics. And I think that's made a big difference in her confidence because she can appear like everyone else. And A couple of months ago, I saw a video where Layan Albaz was the first one to welcome another amputee, another pediatric amputee named Khalil, who was arriving to Chicago. And she walked up to him with her prosthetic legs and she gave him a hug, and she gave his sister and his mom a hug. And, she kind of gave him the grace and that she might have wanted to receive when she arrived. And she really used herself as an example of, I know you're in a wheelchair now. I know that this is really hard now, but look at me. I've been through this journey. I'm still on this journey, but you can do it, and I'm an example. And I think that shows a lot of growth in Layan.
That is amazing. I was, you never know after reading the end of your story, where she might have ended up. But that seems like for now that's the best case scenario. That's amazing.
It is. I mean, the host family, I have to say, the Asaf family has taken her in. It's a huge responsibility when you take in a child, an injured child. And she really needed that space to heal. And, I don't know if she would have gotten it in any other instance, but she had a stability and a security that is really incredible.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you quote the doctor in the story that at least last year estimated that there were between 4,000, 4,500 pediatric amputees in Gaza. What happens for those who aren't lucky enough to come to the States and get better medical treatment? What does life look like for some of those kids and other people?
Well, that section was the hardest to write for me because I needed to explain to the reader why we don't know. We actually don't know a lot about what's happening in Gaza. The picture that we have is incomplete. And I think we need to understand it's incomplete. We will probably never know how many pediatric amputees are actually in Gaza. But the UN in December, they came out and said that Gaza now has the largest cohort of pediatric amputees per capita than any place in the world. And Gaza is the size of Philadelphia. This is not a large place. So I think you need to really think about it in terms of concentration, too. The way we talk about Gaza, it feels like it's a whole country because there's a war and countries go to war, right? But it's actually a thin strip of land. And 5,000 kids, I mean, that is just an estimate. But we know that it's a lot. And I think the way that I want to give credit to an English professor who translates Arabic literature, and he wrote a story about amputated stories, how it comes up. Amputations come up in Palestinian literature a lot. It's a theme. Amputation as indignity, amputation as disunity. And that really helped guide that section where I talk about how many kids we think have amputations, because we really need to understand amputation as a different type of injury entirely. You are losing a part of your body, and you also have other injuries on top of that. It's a distinction from any other injury, a brain injury, broken arm. It's more traumatic, or it's traumatic in a different kind of way. So we do know that it's a record-setting number of kids. And basically, if you don't get care as an amputee, your body can freeze into place. You can have hip contractures, so that you're basically, how you sit in a wheelchair is how your bones kind of grow. So you can't then get a prosthetic 3 years later and just think that your body's going to do this. So you can't think that your hips are just gonna now just stand up when they've been sitting in a chair all day. One of the things that the prosthetist at Shriners Hospital told me is, you sit in a chair, your body starts to look like a chair.
Right.
So if these kids are basically languishing in hospitals, they're languishing at home, they're not going to school, and there will have to be an international project, the likes of which we haven't seen since like World War II, to kind of come into Gaza and make it anywhere near a livable, survivable place. And that doesn't seem to be the political plan either. So, what will happen to these kids is that their lives will go unlived, that they'll be alive, but they'll kind of be ghosts, and that's a tragedy.
Right. I mean, that's what's so powerful too about this story is that you're focusing on one specific person in a narrative long form way, the type of story that the Atavist Magazine specializes in. I mean, why do you think that telling these particular stories in that way, in that focusing on that narrative, and having the word count to be able to get into every part of this person's actual full personality, why do you think that's important in telling these stories so that people don't just move on immediately if they hear a crazy statistic or they hear one person's story quickly or a quick clip? Why is that length of time important for a story like this?
Because what happened to Layan, the loss of her legs, also came with a lot of other losses. And she is also in a very unfamiliar environment. And we have to map out how she's dealing with it current day, but also why she is dealing with it in this way. We have to know the past. And there's just no way that I would have gotten enough understanding to write this story without multiple reporting trips. I've pitched it to other outlets, and they're like, okay, you can go once. I was like, I need to go at least 2 times, probably 3. There is just no way that I can capture the story. And if I can't capture it fully, it's not worth capturing, because I don't want to, if I just went by that first reporting trip, the story would be, there's this kind of angry, bratty girl, and she's kind of a lot to deal with. And yeah, we know she's traumatized, but yeah, that's what it is. And it's important to know why she's acting like that. Well, she was really angry because she arrived alone without any relatives, and then she realized other people arrived with their family members, and her family had decided, we need to get you out of here. We need to get you into the US, where we can't take anybody else with you, so you're going to go alone. So it was a decision that the organization made with the family members. She didn't have agency in that decision. And so she was angry at a lot of people for that. It's nobody's fault. But it makes sense why she's angry. I wouldn't have understood that from that first reporting trip.
Right. It does seem, do you think at the end you had a relationship with her that was a little more similar, obviously not entirely, to the host family, in that she kind of was able to let her guard down a little bit and play with the sisters of the host family, and that you almost had a similar experience, it seems, as the host family did, of those barbs turning into witty comments. She accepted you being there more by the end, it seems.
She did. Her disinterest in us became kind of a running joke, like, oh, you guys, and it at first it was real, and then it became kind of a joke. And it's interesting because as journalists, people are usually interested in you because, what do you do? What is this? She did not care. Right. There were no follow-up questions. And I thought that was funny. She was like, you guys are here to talk to me. I don't really, who are you? And so we did develop the kind of push-pull of our relationship became kind of the relationship. I was like, can we take a picture together? She's like, fine, I have a couple minutes, and it's like.
I mean, you have to think, after someone who has experienced what she's experienced, it would be hard to ask questions of other people about their daily boring lives in comparison, after you've been through something like that.
She has a lot to think about, a lot going on. It makes complete, total sense. And I think she also now, after, it's kind of a joke that this is her brand. By the time I arrived, it was a running joke that this is her brand. Like, when Dina, the host mom, would tell us, I would take her to the grocery store and she would just throw cans of beans down the aisleway. And then Layan would laugh. She's like, yeah, that was so fun. And so she kind of liked that she had this legend about her. And it's kind of like you're the new kid in a new high school, and everybody, like, you kind of have this urban legend following you around. So it was part real, but part also she kind of like made it into a joke that she leaned into, like a self-awareness.
Well, it's cool that brand is now memorialized, or it's logged in this story, which is, I think, it seems like she will be happy. She didn't want her story of the injuries and that focus to haunt her years down the line. So I imagine that she would be happy that this portrayal of her is the one that she might look at, 20 years from now.
And that's all I wanted, because I would hate for a piece that I wrote to add to any emotional turmoil that she's already experiencing. And that was my fear, and that was what I wanted to make sure didn't happen. Layan doesn't mind if I talk about how she was kind of mean or said mean things. She kind of thinks it's funny. So that's good. So it made it easier to write about those things and really pull that out of in print. She doesn't mind that. But she also wants to tell the story of her vulnerability, but have control over that. And I'm glad that she felt that. And I'm glad she's proud of the story. And I'm glad that it's been a source of confidence for her.
Absolutely. And it's great to hear an update on her. I'm sure people who maybe have read your story a year ago will be happy to hear that too.
She's really grown leaps and bounds in a way that I wasn't sure would happen. And, she's always going to be. Nothing can bring back what was taken from her. But these kids are incredibly resilient. And, we're only resilient when we have to be. But she shouldn't have to be resilient. But she is. And these kids want a future for themselves. And they're going to fight to get that future any way they can. And for Layan, she has moved through this with just astounding speed and strength.
Absolutely. Rhana, thank you so much for joining the Sunday Long Read podcast, and congratulations on the National Magazine Award. That is super exciting and super well-deserved.
Thank you for having me.
This episode of the Sunday Long Read podcast was produced by Matthew Whitehurst and me, Amanda Ulrich. The co-founders of the Sunday Long Read newsletter are Jacob Feldman and Don Van Natta Jr. Until next time, thanks for listening.